Hello, and thank you for joining us on today's Ask Andrew show, Canada's first live streaming Facebook question and answer show. My name is Andrew Feldstein, and I'm the principal of Feldstein Family Law Group. We're a family law firm with offices in Markham, Vaughan, Oakville, and Mississauga. Today, our special guest on the show will be Leanne Townsend. Leanne has built a practice in divorce coaching, family law, and public speaking. And today we're going to talk about narcissistic exes, as I know Leanne has a lot of experience in that area. And I'm wondering how you came to develop that kind of niche understanding, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I went through my own divorce, and I don't talk about it too much, but my own ex was a narcissist, and that's when I first started to become more aware of the personality. And I ended up taking some courses that studied narcissistic personality disorder in more depth to gain a better understanding. And I've found just through my own clients that have come through the door, a lot of them have had exes who are narcissists. So again, I developed, I did more learning, and then also had the practical experience of working with people who were in that situation.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I find as a family law lawyer, I've been divorced as well. And I found it gave me a lot better insights into what my clients are experiencing. And I think that's what you're ultimately saying has assisted you down this pathway as well.
Definitely. And I think that it makes you more relatable when you've been through something yourself, because you understand firsthand what clients are going through.
Now, from your perspective, you said you started by taking some courses, and it sounds like you did a lot of research. Are there any things that you would say to people are indicators that they should think my ex may be a narcissist from seeing certain personality traits?
Definitely. There's lots of signs, but it's careful to recognize. You have to be careful to recognize that not every person who seems self-centered and selfish is a narcissist, because I think a lot of people think that of somebody. So it goes further than that. I mean, those are definitely traits of someone who is, but they also have a very strong sense of entitlement. They have a need to be admired all the time. They're very critical of others. They think that they're better than others, but they're also very sensitive to criticism themselves. Often when they are in the earlier stages of a relationship, courting somebody, it's almost like a whirlwind. Like they give that person so much attention, putting them on a pedestal. They're very charming, all of that. So it's easy to get sucked in by them. But then once they know that they have you, they have a tendency then to start belittling you and criticizing you. And it is a form of emotional abuse, because it involves wearing down the other party, undermining their self-esteem, in order to pump up their own, ego, so they feel better about themselves.
So one of the things I see is a lot of clients will come in and will have done their own research, and they'll say to me, Andrew, my ex is a narcissist. And I know before the show we were talking a bit about this. The concern is a lot of people will say my ex is a narcissist, and they may rely on one or two traits. Like, for example, you said they're great at wooing that other spouse at the initial part of the relationship. But that's not necessarily uncommon in any event for people who aren't narcissists. And it's not uncommon for people to go from a very deep, extravagant work at trying to get somebody to be interested, and then over the years to not be at the same level. And the thing you have to, I think you probably see similar to me, but I'd like to know is, do you see some people coming in and they focus on one or two of these traits, but not realizing that it's not necessarily they're a narcissist. They may just be the way it is, or it may be something else.
Yes, that's very true. I mean, I find a high percentage of clients that I have and people who consult with me, think that their ex is a narcissist. And I mean, I'm not here to diagnose whether their ex is or isn't. So, they may be, they may not be. And I would say in some cases, it doesn't necessarily matter for the purposes of the divorce. Like some of the strategies that you might want to use would be the same whether they are a narcissist or not. And I always say it's better to focus on, yourself, your life, what you're doing, what your strategy is, and how you're approaching things, and not be all caught up in what the other person is doing anyway.
Okay, so I want to tie that into the element of your role as a divorce coach, because I think one of the things you do is you're a divorce coach.
That's right, yes.
And maybe you want to describe what the role of a divorce coach is and how you would help someone who is dealing with a narcissist ex.
Yes. So I do divorce coaching through all phases of the divorce process. So it could be pre-divorce, so where somebody's in a relationship and they're thinking of leaving, and maybe they think their ex is a narcissist. They can work with me to get an understanding of what the best strategy might be for approaching the divorce, and what they should do before they start speaking, the divorce language with their ex, and what type of team they might need on board. I also work with people as they're going through the divorce process. So they have another lawyer, not myself, who's handling their divorce, and I work as the coach. And because I have an understanding of how narcissistic relationships work and how narcissists behave, I can help the person deal more with the emotional aspects and some of the strategy, but I'm going to leave the legal strategy to the lawyer. I'm not going to armchair quarterback their lawyer on it. But it's more often when people are, as I'm sure when they're going through a divorce and things, and they're getting triggered by their spouse, which people in divorcing a narcissist often do, they can end up using their lawyer almost as a coach, therapist, social worker, and lawyer kind of role. And by having me as a coach, it takes that part out, so the lawyer can focus on just the legal stuff, and not be having to be involved in all the emotional stuff that somebody going through that experience is that they're experiencing. And it can help save them some fees as well, because I know with myself, I am a lawyer, and I charge a certain rate for if someone does retain me as a lawyer, but my coaching fees are different. So it is a way for them to save some money potentially, and using their lawyer for the thing that their lawyer is meant to be there for, which is more the legal advice. And then I also have divorce recovery. So when someone's actually gone, they're finished the divorce, or they are divorced, it takes a long time for some people to recover and to move forward with their life. And so I have support programs as well for that, to help people, just heal and move forward. And I always say lead their best life in their new life.
So I'm going to start with, I know when I see divorce coaches, I have a lot of divorce coaches try to approach me to get referral work. And you're a lawyer, you've been divorced. A lot of divorce coaches don't have those kind of credentials. And do you ever have clients coming to you and they say, well, why should I hire you? This other person is less expensive. What would be your answer to that when you talk about credentials and qualifications?
Well, I mean, my response would be that I think because I am also a lawyer, I have qualifications as a divorce coach that, most coaches do not have. I know I know how the courts work. I know how the process works. So I'm bringing that to the coaching relationship. And I think, you can study things all you want, and as I'm sure but when you actually have done them and been through the experience, it brings you a whole different level of insight. And so I would say when people work with me in coaching, they're getting that advantage. And I always say I have the warm and fuzzy self-love, self-care, like those kind of buzzwords approach. But I also have like the hard-nosed understanding of the legals, the financials, that money is power in our society. You need to understand money. You need to be comfortable with money. And so unlike, I think, a lot of coaching programs out there, I bring like all of those elements together.
Okay. Now, what makes it different when you're dealing with an ex that is a narcissist, or as you said, may not be a narcissist, but could show some signs of it? How do you advise that person to treat them differently than someone who wouldn't have any of those kind of personality traits?
I think in that situation, somebody needs to, like someone who's dealing with a narcissistic or abusive ex, needs to be firmer on certain things like boundaries, for example. They need to have communication in those types of situations should probably only be through email or through lawyers, even if it's really abusive, versus, a couple who is somewhat amicable. They can deal with certain things directly with each other on the phone or in person. So if you're dealing with a narcissist, the boundaries surrounding communication are important. It's also important to get out of the winning mindset. Like narcissists, the part of being a narcissist is you love to win and you love the adversarial process. So the whole court process really plays into their personality and what they love, because they love winning. And if you approach it, if you're on the other side of it, the victim of that type of abuse, and you're being triggered by them pushing your buttons, so you're doing exactly what they want you to do, and then you're just in fight mode, and maybe losing sight of what you really need to fight over, what's really important here, and what can you let go, even though it irritates you to see your partner or former partner, the narcissist, feel like they're winning or one-upping you. There's certain, like, getting a better understanding of their personality helps someone not get triggered and to think with their head rather than just be thinking out of emotions through the whole process.
Well, I've also said to people, sometimes one of the things that you need to learn is you don't need to communicate just because your ex says you need to communicate. What I mean by that is your ex may send you a text or on Talking Parents or Family Wizard and may want to engage you in an argument. And sometimes the best solution is not to even respond. Because
exactly.
It doesn't warrant a response. And
yes. I was going to say, a lot of people don't understand that. Like, they think they have to respond, and they respond right away out of emotion rather than, letting it sit. And do they need to respond? And if they do, respond calmly and thoughtfully rather than in a triggered emotional state.
Well, it's interesting. That's one of the things I like about the Family Wizard, is that it cautions you if you're responding inappropriately. But what you're saying about the responsiveness is that one of the things people forget is their ex knows how to push their buttons better than anybody else. And when you get that text, that email that just enrages you, that you want to do that quick response because you want to put them in their spot, you don't realize that you're actually playing in typically to what they want, because what they want is that they want that response because that response gives them satisfaction. And
exactly.
If you either don't respond or wait, because if it's not urgent, nobody says you got to respond in 1 hour. You can respond tomorrow or the next day. You can focus it back to just the business if that's what it is. So if your ex says, I'm really upset that you did A, B, and C, you can respond 2 days later and say, I'm sorry, I disagree with that. Have a great day.
Exactly. And that's the best way, for people to approach it. It's hard because when someone is when your ex is saying something that's upsetting you and pushing all your, buttons, it's hard to step back. But, the advice you just gave is what I would say. And I think that's the best advice for people. And
one of the things I regularly will say to people, especially in an email, is when you get that text or the email that really gets you angry and enraged, I tell them, if it's on an email, hit forward and leave it blank. Go type it up however you want. It's really cathartic. It'll make you feel better. Don't put it back to your ex because you may mistakenly hit send and you'll probably regret it. So you leave it blank. And there's a good chance if you wait a day or two for that, you'll delete the whole thing and reduce it to something really short. I know one of my favorite coin words I'll use is, this doesn't serve a useful purpose.
Yeah, but that's great advice. And, as you said, it's difficult, I think, sometimes for people to follow it. But if you keep telling them that enough, and then they see, like, when people actually do that and see that, okay, that actually worked and that was helpful, then, they're more liable to keep doing it and be more thoughtful about how they're reacting to their ex's attempts to trigger them.
And what people have to realize, unfortunately, in a separation, there's frequently battles over power and control. And that power and control frequently flows into forcing someone to engage. And that's part of it, as far as I'm concerned. And like you said, the who win, and what you're trying to do is take out the who win and focus it back on the children, and focusing it back on what you actually need to communicate versus not to communicate. And I think that becomes really important. Now, I know sometimes what's interesting is, do you have any examples of situations, obviously without saying names, of a really successful tactic that one of your clients used in dealing with a narcissist that really help move them along and get past their problems of dealing with that person?
I mean, one of the examples would be something I already mentioned, just with respect to the communication. I had a client who, felt like if their ex called, they had to answer that call. And because they'd said that if they didn't answer it, they let it go to voicemail, the ex would just keep calling and calling and calling. And of course, that would, upset them and drive them crazy. So they felt like they had to answer. But I had them start, you send your ex an email and you say that going forward, I'm only going to communicate with you via email. So if you call me, I'm not going to answer, and in setting out the boundaries and the parameters. And they did that. The ex, of course, tested it a lot, but eventually it did work. The whole dynamic between the two of them changed, and the ex stopped, trying to phone and trying to go around what the boundaries were that had been set. So it was effective, but the client had to be, firm and consistent about enforcing that type of communication.
Okay. And, when you talk about communication and how to communicate, I've had lots of clients say to me the same problem. I've even had some clients say they're going to call the police if I don't answer the phone, saying I disappeared with the children. And one of the things I say is, I know we all feel this sense of when somebody phones, there's two social norms we feel. It's typically A, to answer the phone when it rings, and B, to say goodbye and expect the person on the other end to acknowledge that we're leaving by saying goodbye. And that actually gives a lot of power, because you're almost asking for permission to end the call. And I've said to people, you got to get used to a few things. Number one, if you say you're not taking calls, don't take calls. Block their phone from calling you. Because if you block the phone, you're not going to feel aggravated, because you're not going to hear the phone ringing.
Exactly.
Or turn the ringer off. But learn to deal with it. You'll actually find it very empowering, because you won't feel tethered. The second area where I've had clients like that is they say, well, the children then will get phone calls repeatedly that I'm supposed to answer the call, because I'm not answering. Now they call the kids and say to the kids, your mother or father isn't answering the phone. Go give the phone to your mother or father. And now they're trying to make you the bad guy or the bad mother for not communicating. And obviously you don't want to involve the kids in that. So what would you say to that person of how to handle it?
I would say that, again, they should set out in a detailed email that the way that they're going to communicate, that it's not okay to be communicating, with the children, that it's inappropriate, and that and then you would need to have the client would need to have a conversation with the children about it as well. And, if mommy or daddy is communicating, with you to give me messages or to put me on the phone, you just tell them that, mom or dad has said that you're communicating with each other in the way that's already been discussed, and that they don't need to be involved in it. And it's harder, obviously, if the kids are younger, but when they get a little bit older, they understand that more, and it's easier to not have them have to necessarily be involved that way.
Well, and also there's a short window, because they get involved once they get their devices that the ex can communicate with them. So they're getting a little older and closer to that point. And, one of the things I've said to my clients is really simple. You simply say to the children, mommy and daddy communicate on mommy and daddy's cell phones. So there's no reason for mommy or daddy to call you on your cell phone to speak to the other parent.
Exactly.
And you shouldn't have to be handing the phone over to me. I find a lot of kids are good with that. And one of the interesting things I've said to clients who have landlines, I say, why do you need a landline? Because the landline gives them the ability to communicate with the children to get you on the phone. Take away the landline. And that can be helpful as well. I see we had a question. I'll let you handle this one. Can I get a court order to get my ex evaluated?
I'm assuming that means for narcissism. And in my own experience, I have not seen that happen. I don't know if your practice has been different, and you may have more experience in the courts with that than I do. But I have not seen that happen. I mean, the court would be concerned more, I think, with their parenting and how if they have something mentally that's off, how that's affecting their parenting. And, you know, narcissism doesn't necessarily, it can affect parenting, but it doesn't necessarily.
Well, I think the answer I would give is I've never had a court order an assessment just to determine whether or not a parent is a narcissist. What you will see is you may see an assessment of someone having a psychological evaluation to see if they have issues, as you said, that will relate to their parenting abilities. And they have assessments to see what's in the best interest of the children. And frequently, in order to get an assessment, there needs to be psychological issues. So the question, I think, really is, are those narcissistic tendencies so strong and so overwhelming that a court is going to be inclined to order a psychological assessment or an assessment of the children because of those mental health issues as they present by the parent. And phoning too often, as an example, or emailing too often may not, depending on how extreme the level is. If you have somebody who is emailing 70 times a day and calling 30 times a day, that I'm picking that as an extreme because that's going to jump off the page at you. Versus I've seen somewhere an ex-spouse will say, my ex texted me 20 times 3 days in a row. And then you actually look at what the texts are, and the texts are something along the lines of, I'm driving Bobby to hockey today. Can you take our Johnny to his baseball game? And then the ex says, well, no, I can't for this reason. And they go back and forth. And all it is these innocuous texts about trying to arrange driving. Well, that's a little misleading versus respond to me. I asked you a question. That can't stop because there's a difference in how they look and how they read. And when a client will ask me the question, I usually say, well, you can see when something is wrong, it jumps off the page at you. And I don't know if you agree with that kind of view.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think unfortunately there's cases where it's not as clear cut. It is more the gray and it's upsetting and it's annoying and it's frustrating and all those things when you're on the receiving end of it. But then, you know, it probably doesn't fall into the category, you know, as you mentioned, where it is the extreme where you're going to be able to justify that some sort of assessment needs to take place, or that there really is an actual disorder or something going on here. I think a lot of, even with narcissistic personality disorder, I think there's a spectrum, and you have the extreme case, but there's a lot that don't fall into that category, and they can still be annoying and upsetting and frustrating, but it wouldn't be enough to have a court get involved to the point of asking for ordering an assessment.
Now, how do you feel about parenting coordinators for a narcissist? Does that play into the win mentality and give them what they want because it's a place to continue the conflict? Or is it better because there's someone there to make decisions on the day-to-day issues that a parenting coordinator may be involved in, like a fight about a vacation or a long weekend and things of that nature?
I would say, generally speaking, parenting coordinators can be really helpful for this type of situation because it does involve that third party. So it's not just between the spouses and the dynamic between them. You've now got a third party, and often narcissists like to impress people and charm people, and they don't always show their negative qualities to other people. Like, this is even true when they go into court. Quite often they can be very charming in the court. So they will probably behave differently with a parenting coordinator than they would with the spouse. So generally, I would say that it's a really good idea.
The most fascinating thing I've seen is when you're dealing with someone who is a narcissist on the other side, and the third party, whether it be a judge, a parenting coordinator, an assessor, basically calls them out on it. They don't necessarily say they're a narcissist, but don't agree to what their theory of the case is and actually disagree. Because I have found it to be fascinating to see the reaction. And as you said, they're quite charming. But
yes.
When someone doesn't agree with them, they're not very charming at all. And I don't know if your experience is similar, but it's actually quite the opposite.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, when they don't get their way, or when they don't feel that their charm is working, then they're not so nice, and that's when the more abusive side comes out. And a judge or a parenting coordinator can see that. The other thing, though, that happens with a parenting coordinator is sometimes with a narcissist, if their spouse is telling them something about the children, for example, that one of the children is experiencing difficulty, or one of the children is too young, or having problems going on overnights, or issues that way, if a parenting coordinator who has the expertise and whatnot tells the narcissist certain things, the narcissist might be more willing to accept it coming from someone that they deem to be an expert or knowledgeable, versus the exact same information coming from the other parent. So sometimes it can be helpful in getting the narcissist to agree to more reasonable things, because it's not coming just from the other parent.
Okay, and what would be your best tip you could give to an ex who's dealing with a narcissist?
Boundaries again, just enforce boundaries, that you need to make sure that however you are having them communicate with you, that it's in a way that's not, getting into your psyche and upsetting you. So the less contact you have to have with them, the better, I would say. And it's hard if you have children, you are going to be tied together forever. So it's just really important to learn a way that's going to be healthy for you to deal with them, because they're not going to go away.
So now let's assume I'm going to play the other side of the coin. We have someone who is a narcissist watching this show. What would you give them as advice on how to improve their parenting skills if they truly are concerned about the best interests of their children?
Well, I would say that maybe they might want to look at getting some coaching or therapy themselves, work with, someone who's knowledgeable about narcissism and who can give them tips and strategies on how to be a more effective parent. And the research I've read, although it's hard for a narcissist to change, it's not impossible in the right circumstances. If you have someone who actually acknowledges they have some issues and wants to work on them, there is hope for someone like that. So if they connect with the right support person, they can learn some good tips and strategies. And
do you think that happens very often?
No. If I have to be honest, I would say no. I don't think it happens very often. As I said, I think it's not impossible to have it happen. Have I seen it happen? Not really. But, I guess I try to be hopeful.
Is there any suggestions you'd give for someone to try and give the tools or make it easier for their ex to go down that path? Because obviously you're not going to say to your ex you're a narcissist to get help. But is there any tips you could give where someone says to their ex, you're not getting boundaries, and if you want to co-parent effectively for the best interests of our children, you need to learn boundaries. We need to have different rules on communications, and if we can't get there, maybe we both need to go get help. Have you ever seen that try to work to at least get somebody on the way? You're never going to get that admission, yeah, I'm a narcissist, but get them to admit they have some of those traits and help at dealing with them.
Well, and I think that's a great way to approach it, is, to discuss the behavior rather than throwing, a term around and labeling somebody with something. To discuss a behavior and how it could benefit the children to, behave in a different way and maybe get some help or tips. And, if you put it in the context that both parties are going to get some tips and advice, then you're not just singling out the narcissist. So I think that's a really, if it's going to work, that's the best way to approach it.
So if I were to sum it up, you would say the most important thing is understand boundaries, understand the rules of communication, the limits, when to communicate, when not to communicate. If you're dealing with someone who is a narcissist and you want to try to get them the tools to help, do it in a very neutral kind of language and suggest that you both go do it together, because if you both do it together, you're not singling them out or offending their sense of self-worth. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, that's a really good summary.
Okay. Now, I know we're winding down near the end of the show, Leanne, and I really do appreciate you coming out today. And I understand you have a very large social media following. So is there anything that you wanted to say where people can find you?
Yes, my website is www.leannetownsend.ca. That has all my contact information. And I'm also on Facebook, Leanne Townsend, and I'm quite active on Instagram, Leanne Townsend Life. So you can find all of my details in any of those places.
Okay, and as you said, you have the soft fuzzy side and the harder edge side as well.
Yes.
For those viewers, I hope that they have found this show interesting because it's been a very unique dynamic that we've tried to deal with on today's show that is more narrow than most of our shows, but it's something that actually happens far more often, and I see it a lot in my show. So again, Leanne, I wanted to thank you for joining us on the show. It was a real pleasure having you, and it was an interesting topic. And for anyone who's interested about Leanne, she said leannetownsend.ca. The next Ask Andrew show is April 18th at 1 p.m. If you have any requests or ideas for future shows, please email them to us at info@feldsteinfamilylaw.com. You can obviously see us on our website, separation.ca, if you're watching on Facebook. And I wanted to thank everyone for watching, and have a great day.
Thank you.